Let's go back to private citizens. What means can or do private citizens use to influence Congress? And then, obviously, with interest groups, they play a larger role, I assume, you'll say, in shaping legislation. So can you talk about the means the average citizen can use and then what interest groups do?
Sure. If we looked at square one, then we recognize that American citizens can vote, which has a great effect on those serving in Congress and how they behave during office. Secondly, there's no denying the tremendous role that money plays in American electoral politics, and Americans are keenly aware of their opportunity to contribute money, in addition to the obvious fact that a few Americans, the very wealthy 1%, have a tremendous influence on the nature of our legislative process. In addition, Americans can exercise influence on the shaping of legislation through interest groups by joining particular organizations, whether it's the National Rifle Association or whether it's the American Civil Liberties Union. Americans can influence legislation and the behavior of Congress through those groups, and of course through participation in political parties as well. So there are lots of tools and opportunities for Americans to affect legislation.
What does the Gilens and Paige research show about who has the major influence on Congress?
There's little doubt that heavily moneyed groups, the wealthy in this country, the well-organized interest groups exact tremendous influence on the shaping of legislation, which of course has led to a great deal of debate in this country about the fact that money can undermine the role that the average ordinary American can play in influencing legislation and affecting American politics.
Can you speak to some remedies that have been suggested to change things?
Certainly a number have been aired. For example, there are strong proponents of eliminating the role of private money and moving toward a publicly financed campaign. That's a method that's been embraced by many American people as a means of affecting the role of money. Secondly, there have been suggestions to curb not only the amount of money that can be spent, but by whom. There's been an effort by opponents of super PACs to try to limit the role of super PACs. One of the concerns is that even though by law super PACs are not supposed to be able to coordinate, for example, with presidential campaigns, most Americans believe that there's a great deal of coordination, and thus the law is essentially mocked by those practices.
And before concluding this lesson, let's just briefly turn to Congress's power to investigate. Can you point out some positive and negative examples of Congress's use of its investigatory powers?
The investigatory power is a great tool granted to Congress and upheld by the Supreme Court on numerous occasions. One of the great highlights in American history certainly was the investigatory role played by the Senate Select Committee on Watergate, which revealed the abuse of power, the illegal, unconstitutional actions carried out by the Nixon administration. That was a very, very important point in American history. Certainly one of the most negative or disappointing examples of the investigatory power occurred in the early 1950s during the period known as McCarthyism, as committees in both the House and the Senate, particularly the House Committee on Un-American Activities, abused its power, very greatly damaged and in some cases ruined the lives of many Americans who were falsely accused of being communist. And in any case, the committee overstepped its authority, as the court would later say, in conducting the business of investigating the personal politics and viewpoints of the American people.
So let me end the lesson with two very broad questions. Do you think that the complex system of separated powers, checks and balances, which you've been discussing, do you think that inhibits majority rule? Do you worry about it?
I do worry because the system as it currently operates frustrates the expression of the American people with respect to some of the most important issues of our time. By virtue of the fact that we have instituted separation of powers and checks and balances, it means that we're going to move by the process of deliberation and usually very slowly. But it also is a system that in many ways frustrates the American people on some great issues, and particularly emotional issues such as gun regulation. We've seen, for example, that just in the last few years, in light of all the tragedies, the shooting tragedies that have occurred around the country, Americans to the tune of some 90% want greater gun regulation, but the system as it operates currently frustrates that great wish.
And leading scholars, obviously, others have referred to Congress as a, quote, broken branch or dysfunctional. Are you concerned? And if you are, what are your major concerns? What do you think could be done about it?
I'm very concerned. I do think that Congress is not operating nearly as efficiently as it could, and in many ways it resembles a broken system. The hyper-partisanship is a major problem. The very fact that Congress has become so ideological in its approach that Congress is uninterested in compromise means that we're looking at the great prospect of damaging the republic that we all cherish, because compromise is critical to the maintenance of the health and vitality of the republic. And what to do about that? There are a great many proposals out there. In my view, one of the principal problems, indeed probably the biggest problem, is the role of money in campaign politics. I personally embrace the idea of publicly financed campaigns. Some people propose the idea of term limits as a means of removing those who are principally interested in careerism from office. That's a very delicate issue, because the framers of the Constitution and many American people today still believe that Americans have a choice. We don't need term limits because the vote itself is a term limit. But in my own view, if I could wave a magic wand, I would embrace publicly financed campaigns and trim or curb the role of publicly of monies from private parties.